Today, the Pittsburgh Steelers will welcome Mike McCarthy as their next head coach in his introductory press conference at Acrisure Stadium. And before all that happens, guys, I wanted to get in front of a camera today and break down the pros and the cons of Mike McCarthy as a head coach for the Pittsburgh Steelers, some of the very reasonable concerns as well as some of the reasons why McCarthy could potentially work out here with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Make sure you guys stay tuned to the end of today's video for my initial grade on the McCarthy hire here for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, before we get into the show today, I do want to let you guys know that we will be going live for our live reaction to the press conference here on the show at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time. That is a half hour before McCarthy and Mr. Rooney and Omar are going to be taking the stage at Acrisure Stadium later this afternoon. And, of course, we'll be reacting to the press conference live on the channel. So if you guys don't want to miss any of our free content that we're going to be having all throughout the offseason, we'll also be going live for at least the first couple of days of NFL free agency. We'll be live for every single day of the NFL draft this year. Make sure you guys click that subscribe button to never miss our daily and free coverage on the black and gold. Now, the first thing that I want to get out of the way here is I want to start with the bat, all right? And I want to start with the very legitimate concerns and gripes Steelers fans have when it comes to this hire and why it got the reaction initially that it got on Saturday afternoon. And we'll start with really the main thing, in my opinion, that really was the catalyst for the anger and the angst that we saw on social media and the reaction to this hire over the weekend, which is Mike McCarthy's recent playoff past. And plain and simply, guys, McCarthy, hasn't done enough in the NFL postseason recently. In his last 7 seasons as an NFL head coach, he's been to the playoffs a number of times, but he's only got one playoff win, and that one playoff win came against an 8-9 Tampa Bay Buccaneers team with a 45-year-old Tom Brady at the time. So it's not like that playoff win was like super impressive or anything like that. And for a lot of Steelers fans, this hire feels like this photo right here, this meme, where you're just swapping out somebody in Mike Tomlin who obviously had issues getting it done in the playoffs. This team has not won a playoff game in almost a decade at this point. And, now you're swapping him out for somebody that, the narrative on him is that he can't get it done in the postseason. So, for a fan base that wanted somebody that they felt had the upside of, getting playoff victories and putting this team back in contention to win a Super Bowl, the Mike McCarthy hire doesn't really strike home as one that a lot of fans are excited about. And because of Mike McCarthy's track record in the playoffs recently, I would say that the pressure is certainly on for him to deliver and to win in the postseason and quickly if he wants to win the hearts of Steelers Nation. Because, the last several years of the Mike Tomlin regime showed that, winning 10 games and getting to the playoffs is not enough. You have to be able now to take this team to the next step and, to the next step forward and win playoff games and put this team in Super Bowl contention. And, that's going to be difficult to do. There's not a whole lot of teams on any given year that are in legitimate Super Bowl contention. But if Mike McCarthy doesn't get this team into, legitimate playoff and Super Bowl contention right away, I feel like a lot of people are not going to be very happy with this hire, at least in the short-term future. Also, another legitimate gripe that people have with Mike McCarthy's profile that also is similar to Mike Tomlin is that McCarthy has been blasted for being a poor game manager throughout his career. Now, even Sean McVay and Dan Campbell and some guys and Kyle Shanahan and guys that you would consider like high-end, NFL head coaches, get criticized for their game management at times. But McCarthy's, criticisms when it comes to game management do go back a while, and people do point to this as one of the reasons why, McCarthy teams, have been limited in the recent past. Also, his teams tend to be pretty heavily penalized, especially in his Dallas Cowboys days, where his teams just weren't all that disciplined, and it would cost his teams certain games and in certain, big moments. And, obviously that is not something we want to see here in Pittsburgh during his tenure. Also, he's had some pretty big misses at defensive coordinator hires. I would say the best defensive coordinator hire he's ever made was Dan Quinn. And if he can find legitimate a legitimate answer at the defensive coordinator position, I think, that would be a very good thing. But I just can't stress enough to you guys how important the defensive coordinator hire is going to be here in Pittsburgh. If he gets a Dan Quinn style of defensive coordinator, somebody that, brings a modern defense and will get after quarterbacks and will make the most of this defensive roster that we have here in Pittsburgh, I think we could be cooking with gas. We really could, because Terrell Austin and Mike Tomlin obviously didn't get the most out of this group, but they have the talent and they certainly have the money invested on this side of the ball to be at least a top 10, top 5, potentially even top 3 defense if you make the correct hire at defensive coordinator. But McCarthy has only had one top 5 defense in his entire career as a head coach, and he's had some really bad hires at defensive coordinator throughout his career, especially his most recent DC hire in Mike Zimmer, who is somebody that has completely lost the plot and is completely old school. He also hired Mike Nolan his first year with the Dallas Cowboys. That was a complete failure. So we'll see who he ends up hiring as defensive coordinator. Now, the early defensive coordinator favorites for Mike McCarthy are Al Harris, the Chicago Bears pass game coordinator. He was the DB's coach under McCarthy there in Dallas. He also played for McCarthy in Green Bay. Anthony Weaver, the team reportedly really likes him, and I think it was Kabali said that the Steelers are still very interested in potentially bringing Weaver in as DC, even though he didn't get the head coaching job. And then Patrick Graham right now is the betting favorite to get the job. He worked for McCarthy in Green Bay his final season there, and Graham has actually done a pretty admirable job as the defensive coordinator there of the Raiders. A couple years ago when Max Crosby had his last fully healthy season, they were a top 10 defense without a lot of top-end talent, and if he comes to be the next defensive coordinator of the Steelers, he would have by far the most roster talent that he's ever had to work with. I really admire his adaptive defensive play calling approach. He got that from Bill Belichick working for him in New England, and I think he's had some pretty impressive seasons as DC of certain teams where he's punching above his weight. So who's your guy? Let me know down there in the comment section. Who do you want to be the Pittsburgh Steelers' next defensive coordinator? Let me know your pick down there in the comment section. In just a second here, I'm going to tell you about our sponsor today at Prize Picks. While I'll let you know about our sponsor, let me know who you guys want as the next Steelers defensive coordinator. And now let's have a word from our sponsor today here at Prize Picks. And the big game in Santa Clara between the Seahawks and Patriots is almost here, and there's no better way to cash in during America's biggest sporting event than with Prize Picks, where it always feels good to be right. And since the big game is right around the corner, that also means it's your last chance to get into the football action before next season. So close the season out right with Prize Picks by getting $50 instantly in lineups when you play your first $5. With the new social feeds feature, you can share Prize Picks with your friends and copy lineups from winners with a single click. Copy lineups you like or use them as inspiration for your own picks. And a new feature from Prize Picks that they now have is early payouts. If your player gets off to a hot start, you now have the option to cash out those winnings before the game even finishes. So download the Prize Picks app today. Use code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code CLNS to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. Then the final con that I want to bring up when it comes to Mike McCarthy's profile as the next head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers is that a lot of Steelers fans feel like it is a missed opportunity to hire a 62-year-old, 18-year head coaching veteran as opposed to doing what this team has traditionally done, which is reset, reboot, modernize with a younger head coach to come in and run the organization. And many people feel like this is a safe move for somebody that has a decent track record that will get to here in a second, but a lot of people wanted the young and exciting rookie head coach option, somebody that comes from a very modern organization like the Los Angeles Rams. A lot of people wanted either Chris Shula or Nate Schulhouse to be the next head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. There's mixed reporting on just how well those interviews with Shula and Schulhouse went, but obviously those guys didn't even get second interviews with the Pittsburgh Steelers, so obviously there was something that Shula and Schulhouse were saying that the Steelers didn't align with, and and McCarthy ends up getting the position. But, all, the negatives that come with Mike McCarthy being acknowledged, there is a lot more good and a lot more positive to McCarthy's profile than I think people are willing to acknowledge, because they wanted Shula or because they wanted just a younger head coach in general, and they don't agree with the hire. They just think that this is all bad. It's an F- hire, and there's nothing good about it. But, I think that there is some positives to take away from Mike McCarthy being the next head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and why he might just work out as this team's next head coach. The first pro that I want to bring up is one of the big reasons why he got this hire is that he does have an extremely impressive resume that he brings to the table that compares to some of the best coaching candidates of the last several cycles in the National Football League. You guys can take a look here at his resume. He's one of 6 active NFL head coaches that have won a Super Bowl. By the way, there's only one active head coach that's won multiple Super Bowls, and that's Andy Reid. There's 5 that have just won one, and Mike McCarthy is one of those. He's also got 174 career wins. That is 15th all-time in NFL history. That's more than 22 coaches that are already in the Hall of Fame. And he's 4th among active coaches in career wins as well. His career win percentage is over 60%, which, by the way, is better than Chuck Noll. It's better than Bill Parcells. It's better than Jimmy Johnson. It's better than Tom Landry. It's better than Kyle Shanahan. It's better than Mike Shanahan. Like, there's a lot of, Hall of Fame level coaches that Mike McCarthy has a better win percentage than as well. He has 6 12-plus win seasons over the course of his 18-year coaching career. That is 4th all-time. And then he's got 11 playoff wins, which is currently 3rd among active head coaches. So for a guy that kind of has that, stigma on him that he doesn't win playoff games, he's currently 3rd among active head coaches in playoff wins right now. And then, you compare his profile to other, marquee head coaching candidates over the last several cycles, guys like John Harbaugh, Sean Payton. By the way, Harbaugh and Payton have also coached for 18 years in the National Football League, and they've been head coaches for 18 seasons in this league. And you guys can see, even though Harbaugh and Payton have slightly more wins than McCarthy, they have very similar amounts of wins. They have very similar amounts of playoff wins. In fact, McCarthy has more playoff wins than Sean Payton. Then all 3 only have 1 Super Bowl appearance and 1 Super Bowl victory. So Mike McCarthy very much compares to a guy like John Harbaugh, who was seen as the marquee head coaching candidate of this cycle, ends up getting hired by the New York Giants. Everyone loves that hire, but now everyone hates the Mike McCarthy hire. I don't know, man. I just look at these resumes, and I think Mike McCarthy, stacks up pretty nicely with some of these other coaches that, are still seen as top coaches in the National Football League. Also, Mike McCarthy is a super highly respected guy in the National Football League. And the reason why this is important, guys, is because head coaches need to build out their staffs. And Mike McCarthy, I think what he brings to the table is the ability to use his connections, to use, all the different links and ties that he has to a bunch of different people around the league to build one of the better staffs in the National Football League here with the Pittsburgh Steelers. And, I think fans tend to fixate on playoff results, which is why McCarthy's, reputation among fans and all these different things, is not as high as the opinion of people in the league. And I think the reason for that is football people care more about, consistent success. And, the reason why they really praise Mike Tomlin for never having a losing season in 19 years, whereas fans don't really care about that. Why they really respect Mike McCarthy and his track record, despite the recent playoff failures that he has had in Dallas. The reason why football people respect Mike McCarthy and Mike Tomlin, these guys that have had recent struggles in the playoffs, is because football people know how hard it is to win in the National Football League, period, let alone get consistent success in this league and consistently put your team in a position to win. It's a really, really hard thing to do, and people that are, a part of the National Football League, whether as players or as coaches, understand that, which is why guys like Tomlin and McCarthy have a high level of respect within, people that are in the league. but people that are fans that aren't really in the league, they have expectations of playoff success. And by the way, I'm not chastising fans for wanting to win the playoffs. Absolutely, that should be the goal for every single fan. But I do think that McCarthy's reputation inside the league is higher than it is among fans, which should allow him to build a pretty good staff here in Pittsburgh. Also, the offensive track record from Mike McCarthy, is about as good as anybody else that was certainly available on the open market during this coaching cycle. There was no Ben Johnson. There was no Kyle Shanahan available. But Mike McCarthy, he's right up there with guys like Sean Payton, who have been an offensive-minded head coach as long as he has been. And, he's got 4 number 1 scoring offenses. He had 2 of them in Dallas. That's over 20% of his seasons. That's 1 in every 5 seasons, essentially. Mike McCarthy is having a number 1 scoring offense. And then, even if it's not the number 1 offense, he's got a top 5, like an elite scoring offense in half of the seasons he's been a head coach. That is an awesome track record. Now, he's also had some really great quarterbacks that we'll talk about here in a second, but I think McCarthy has a pretty big hand to play in why those quarterbacks were so great in these offenses. He's also had, MVPs, 2 of them with Rodgers. He's had a couple of MVP runners-up with Rodgers one season and then Prescott in 2023. And I think that, quarterbacks really tend to play super well in his offense because he's really, really good with them, man. Like, this guy's been known as one of the premier quarterback whisperers and developers over the last several seasons, and over the last 3 decades, really. He's been known as one of the top guys to develop quarterback talent in the league. And, let's face it, like the number 1 job of whoever the Steelers were going to hire as their next head coach was going to be to find and then develop our next franchise quarterback here in Pittsburgh. That is the number 1 job of the next head coach of the Steelers. And out of the guys that were available on the market, I understand why the Steelers said, you know what, we trust Mike McCarthy more than anybody else we could hire to, provide a stable foundation for our next franchise quarterback and develop them into the next great Steelers quarterback. And you can take a look at some of the quarterbacks that McCarthy has worked with throughout his career. He turned around Rich Gannon's career when it was a really rough start for him in his career. Then you go to Aaron Banks, who, you guys probably don't even know who Aaron Banks is. He put up big numbers with Aaron Banks there with the New Orleans Saints as their offensive coordinator. Then, he helps develop Alex Smith in the early years there in San Francisco. Then he, helps Brett Favre, get a second wind in his career after a little bit of a lull in Green Bay. Then he develops Aaron Rodgers into one of the greatest passers of all time, and then Dak Prescott into somebody that was an okay, starting quarterback to a top 10 guy. And McCarthy's QB school has really become legendary. Like, Rodgers has talked about it a lot. A lot of these quarterbacks that have worked with McCarthy, Alex Smith has talked about it as well. Talk about how McCarthy does such a good job coaching the fundamentals for these quarterbacks, not only in terms of physical fundamentals like footwork and ball carriage and throwing mechanics and all these different things. It's Rodgers credits McCarthy for fixing his throwing motion and all these different things. And, of course, Rodgers has one of the most iconic throwing motions in NFL history, but also the mental side of things. He grinds tape with these quarterbacks, and, he makes sure that these guys understand the game of football, understand defensive coverages, and it's why guys like, Rodgers and Prescott have become 2 of some of the most intelligent quarterbacks we've seen in the last 2 decades in the National Football League. I mean, remember when Rodgers came out of Cal and he was holding the ball up towards his ear and, super robotic over-the-top throwing motion? Well, guess who fixed his throwing motion? It was Mike McCarthy in Green Bay in his QB school, and he developed him into one of the best, if not the best thrower of the football of all time. So obviously Rodgers had a lot of natural ability and talent, but I've been seeing people on Twitter being like, oh, Rodgers was always going to be as good as he was. He's one of the all-time great talents. And it's like, yeah, he had that talent, but he also had to develop the fundamentals and the mental acuity to be able to be as dominant as he was in Green Bay. And Mike McCarthy is the one that really got that out of him. And then, another case study that you can look at is Dak Prescott. Under Jason Garrett, he was a good quarterback, especially if he had a good run game with Ezekiel Elliott early in his career. He was a pretty darn good game manager, but he wasn't really somebody where if Zeke got hurt or if he wasn't performing well, that could carry an offense. And, he was somebody that was highly dependent on that run game to put up good production. But under McCarthy, he turned into one of the most surgical passers in the National Football League. And it's not like Dak Prescott has Aaron Rodgers level physical ability, all right? Like he's a good athlete, but he's not a dynamic rusher of the football or anything like that. He's got a good arm, but not a bazooka of an arm. And he has turned into one of the best anticipatory passers in the league. He can just pick people apart. And now he's gone from a guy that needed a strong run game to somebody that can carry an offense just like he did in 2023, just like he did this year with the Dallas Cowboys. By the way, Brian Schottenheimer still runs a McCarthy-style offense there in Dallas because it fits the skill set of Dak Prescott. And, let's not forget, it's not just the big names that McCarthy has worked well with. Matt Flynn became a millionaire because of how good he looked in Mike McCarthy's system. Of course, he gets that big contract from Seattle, and then he immediately loses the starting job to Russell Wilson, all right? Like, the ability to elevate Matt Flynn, of all people, should be very impressive to people when it comes to Mike McCarthy. He also went 9-5 with Cooper Rush, of all people, as his QB1. Did you see Cooper Rush in Baltimore this year? And by the way, that Baltimore roster, it's not that bad, and he was absolutely atrocious, all right? Cooper Rush nearly won twice the amount of games than he lost with Mike McCarthy as his offensive play caller. So this is somebody that can get the most out of quarterbacks, whether it's a highly talented first-round pick type of guy like Aaron Rodgers or a guy like Cooper Rush, a severely limited backup quarterback. Mike McCarthy can make it work with pretty much anybody at the quarterback position, and he's proven that over 2 decades nearly of being an offensive-minded head coach. And now it's Will Howard's turn to go to school. Now, I can't guarantee you that Will Howard's going to develop into, the next Dak Prescott or, let alone the next Aaron Rodgers. And I can't even guarantee you he'll be a starter for this team down the road. But it seems like Mike McCarthy does like the upside with Will Howard, and I'm guessing he will give him at least a chance to develop and prove what he can do over the next several months as we approach the 2026 season. And if he takes his teachings and his QB school seriously, we know Will Howard's got some nice athleticism. He's got really good size. He does have NFL starting quality arm strength. Like, if he can develop the mental side of the game, the accuracy, consistency, that some of that stuff was missing on his Ohio State tape, we could be looking at somebody that as a 6th-round pick could be, one of the best success stories for Mike McCarthy when it comes to quarterback development. So let me know what you guys think down there in the comments section. What is your confidence level in Mike McCarthy to deliver the next great Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback? Give me a 1, meaning no, I'm not confident at all, to 10, meaning he is definitely delivering the next great Steelers quarterback. Let me know what you guys think down there in the comments section, your confidence level in McCarthy's QB development ability. And then also, I don't think this was the number one reason why the Steelers hired McCarthy. I think the QB development stuff was probably more important, but his connection to Aaron Rodgers certainly doesn't hurt. It certainly appears that the Pittsburgh Steelers would love to do business with Aaron Rodgers again in 2026, and the players clearly want Rodgers back. It has been well reported by a number of different people, from Schefter to Brooke Pryor, that, pretty much to a T, to a player, the Steelers players in the locker room want Aaron Rodgers back if he wants to come back to play in 2026. And personally, I'm kind of with them. With this not being a great quarterback market, I could do another year with Aaron Rodgers at QB1, especially because, in my opinion, what Rodgers was able to do last year with a wide receiver room that was as bad as it was actually pretty impressive. There was times where Aaron Rodgers, was really carrying the team at times with his ability to diagnose defenses, get the ball out quickly, not take negative plays, get the ball to his playmakers out in space. Because frankly, guys, there was just nobody getting open down the field. DK Metcalf's production, took a hit last year, 850 yards on 59 catches. Obviously, he had the 2-game suspension, and he ends up getting 6 touchdowns. But he was double-teamed for a lot of last season, because you look at the rest of what Aaron Rodgers had to work with. Your number one option outside of Metcalf was Calvin Austin III, who could barely crack 30 catches and 370 yards. And then you've got Roman Wilson, Adam Thielen, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Scotty Miller, a bunch of guys that, couldn't even crack 15 catches on the year. These guys just were not open enough for Aaron Rodgers. And for a guy like Rodgers who doesn't move around, he's got to use his arm talent. He's got to stay in the pocket. having really high-quality receivers is so important, and he just didn't have that last season. So if Mike McCarthy, an offensive-minded head coach, who, by the way, has a pretty darn good eye for wide receiver talent, right? Donald Driver, Greg Jennings, Jordy Nelson, CeeDee Lamb, all right? Like, he brought in Amari Cooper. Like, this guy has a pretty good sense for what makes a good wide receiver. If he can get Aaron Rodgers 2 more legitimate wide receiver weapons, not only is it going to provide more open options for Aaron Rodgers in the downfield passing game, but it's going to open up DK Metcalf, right? If you got other threats out there, that's going to, get some safety attention away from DK, which could open up the deep threat ability that he provides for the Steelers offense. So I really don't think we're that far away, guys, from having a really good offense, honestly, with Aaron Rodgers. Now, you might be saying at home, but Jack, Rodgers can't move anymore. We need a quarterback that can move around in order to have a high-level offense. Well, my rebuttal to that would be, Matthew Stafford doesn't run around. He never runs the football. I think Rodgers himself had more rushing yards than Matthew Stafford this year. But guess what? Matthew Stafford's an MVP finalist. He might win the MVP at the NFL honors coming up here, in a couple weeks. And, the reason for that is he's got awesome arm talent and he's got supreme, mental processing ability. And guess what? He's got receivers to throw to. Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams, they're open a ton for him, and an offensive play caller that knows how to get those guys open. If the Steelers bring in a couple good receivers for Rodgers next year, and now you already have the upgraded offensive play caller in Mike McCarthy, I'm not saying Rodgers is going to win league MVP, but I do think you could see this Steelers offense take a step up in year 2 of the Aaron Rodgers era if Aaron decides to come back. So make the call for me down there in the comment section. Do you want Aaron Rodgers back for one more season here in Pittsburgh? It seems like the Steelers players want that. What do you guys want? Give me a yes or a no down there in the comment section. And now the moment of truth has arrived here. Time for my final initial grade on this hire with Mike McCarthy. And guys, this is going to be something where obviously we don't know how good of a hire this is going to be until we see it in action, until we see if Mike McCarthy can develop a quarterback, if Rodgers comes back. There's still so many unknowns when it comes to, how this thing is going to go here in Pittsburgh. But for now, I think a solid B grade is very modest, and I think it's very fair. A lot of people on Twitter and all these different places want to say it's an F or an F minus. I've seen that on Pittsburgh radio a couple times. But to get a guy with a track record of a Mike McCarthy, with the resume that we laid out, with the offensive history that we laid out, with the quarterback development history that we laid out, I get that it's not all positive with Mike McCarthy. I don't think this is a slam dunk hire. I don't blame anybody for not being super juiced up or pumped for this hire, because frankly, it does feel a little bit like you swapped out Mike Tomlin for another version of Mike Tomlin, only on the offensive side of the ball. But at the very least, the focus shifts from defensive-minded to offensive-minded. You get somebody that has really had a struggle finding the right quarterback to replace Ben Roethlisberger, to somebody with a long history of developing quarterbacks. So even though I don't think Mike McCarthy was like the slam dunk hire Steelers fans were hoping to get this offseason, I think it's a very solid hire with a pretty decent chance of working out. So sound off for me down there in the comment section. Grade the hire of Mike McCarthy as the next head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Give me an A, B, C, D, or F. I'm giving it a modest B grade, but let me know what you guys think down there in the comments section. And that'll be it for today's first Steelers Talk video of the day. Again, we're going to be going live at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time this afternoon for the introductory press conference. We'll react to that together, and then later this afternoon, I'll be putting out a second video with my takeaways from Mike McCarthy's introductory press conference. So make sure you guys click that subscribe button if you haven't already. Till next time, guys, here we go, Steelers.